and the King, comforter of the Spirit, true intuitive, word, president, full of soul, famous treasure, blessings and giver of life. Come and abide us and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good.
Okay, so we're in chapter 13, and this is fascinating material. It's some of the and some of the more wild visions from the book of Revelation. Would anybody like to read 13?
I'll try. I've got a pussycat in the background, so we'll have to put up with it. The beast with 10 horns and 7 hands. I then stood on the seashore and saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. On his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads blasphemous names. The beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like that of a mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. One of his heads looked like it had been fatally wounded, but his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled at the beast. They expressed adoration to the dragon, which had given the authority to the beast. They also expressed adoration to the beast, saying, "Who is like this beast? Who is able to make war with him?" A mouth speaking great things and blasphemy was given to the beast, and authority to make war for 42 months. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to slander his name and his habitation, even those who dwell in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to overcome them. Authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will express adoration to him. Everyone whose name has not from the foundation of the world been written in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. Let anyone who has an ear listen. If anyone is to go into captivity, sorry, somebody else should read.
Okay, somebody want to pick up here? 10?
I can do it.
Okay.
Wait, verse 10, you said?
Yeah.
If anyone is to go into captivity, he will go into captivity. If anyone is to be killed with the sword, he must be killed. Here is a call for the patient endurance and the faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his behalf, and makes the earth and those who dwell in it express adoration before the first beast, the one whose fatal wound had been healed. He performs great signs, even making fire come down out of the sky to the earth in the sight of people. He deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs he was granted to perform in front of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. It was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that it should speak and cause as many as would not express adoration to the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given marks on their right hands or on their foreheads. Hence, no one will be able to buy or sell unless he has that mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let anyone who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666.
All right. So this chapter is completely packed. Now, before we get into it, or directly into this, let's look at the book of Daniel, chapter 7. Because this is where some of this material is being drawn from. In the first year of King of Baltazar, king of the Chaldeans, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed, and he wrote his dream. This is from the Septuagint. I, Daniel, beheld, and lo, the four winds of heaven blew violently upon the great sea. And there came up four great beasts out of the sea, differing one from another. The first was as a lioness, and her wings as an eagle's. I beheld her wings were plucked, and she was lifted off from the earth. And she stood on human feet, and a man's heart was given to her. Behold, a second beast, like a bear, and it supported itself on one side. There were three ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this one I looked, and behold, another wild beast as a leopard, and it had four wings of a bird upon it. And the wild beast had four heads, and power was given to it. After this one I looked, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and exceedingly strong, and its teeth were of iron, devouring and crushing to atoms, and it trampled the remainder with its feet. And it was altogether different from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I noticed his horns, and behold, another little horn came up from the midst of them, and before it 3 of the former horns were rooted out. Behold, there were eyes as of the eyes of a man in this horn, and a mouth speaking great things. So obviously there's continuity here with the though this is a beast coming out of the sea, which has and this is a continuity here with the dragon who was threatening the woman and her child, who the woman who gave birth, who was clothed with the sun and with the stars around her halo. The dragon, of course, is the image of Satan, or is the character of Satan. Then I stood on the seashore and saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads blasphemous names. Now, ultimately, this being is the Antichrist. And all of this is symbolic of power and of a kind of a sevenfold presence, power of the Antichrist. And in this passage, there are many aspects that are directly antithetical to the Christ. On his horns were 10 crowns. And on his heads, blasphemous names. So there are 70. So it's a symbol of not just sevenfold, but 70-fold power. Now, one of the things that this can be interpreted in terms of is the ancient Hebrew idea of the Most High God who had 70 sons, 7 times 10, 70. And these and so as these sons were the angels of the various nations to whom they were apportioned, but Yahweh was the senior of them, who had been given Israel, but who was not, of course, among this 70 that is rebellious, but rather is of course God himself. On his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads blasphemous names. Now, if you remember one of the marks of the high priest and the king were that they had a crown with the name of God on it, on their forehead. And so instead of the name of God on these crowns, they were instead blasphemous names, antithetical to God. The beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. That's a pretty scary critter. And the dragon gave him power, his throne, and his authority. So, whereas the beast is given power from the dragon, from Satan, Christ is given power and authority and the throne from the Most High God. One of his heads looked like it had been fatally wounded, but this fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled at the beast. So, one of the possible things feeding into this, because to a great extent, especially as it gets to the bottom, it becomes very clear that this figure of the Antichrist is Nero, the Emperor Nero, who commanded a great persecution of Christians, and also who began the overthrow of Jerusalem under his reign. Nero committed suicide in the year 68, 2 years before the ultimate destruction of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem had already been under siege. The time it was under siege was 3.5 years. So there's a lot of things that point to Nero in this as the one who is being symbolized as the beast. It was like a leopard's feet, like those of a bear, in his mouth, the mouth of a lion, who received his authority, his power and throne from Satan himself. There was a story going around at the time that Nero really didn't die, that he actually left and went into a foreign country, but that he would return. So you have this idea going around that he was healed from his wound. The whole earth marveled at the beast. They expressed adoration to the dragon. Now, this is actually a bad translation. It's not adoration. Adoration is the word latria, and it means the worship that is given only to God. But the word here is proskinesis, which means to bow down before or venerate. They expressed veneration to the dragon, which had given his authority to the beast. And they also expressed adoration to the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" So you have another parallel. They expressed adoration to the dragon, whereas Christians adore only God. God who had given his authority to his Son, whom we also adore and venerate. So you see how this use of antithetical image. Well, it's the whole thing is an exercise in antithesis of a comparison between God and Satan and the beast and Christ. Saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? A mouth speaking great things in blasphemy was given to the beast, and authority to make war for 42 months. Here again, Nero's war against Jerusalem was for 42 months. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God. To slander his name and his habitation, even those who dwell in heaven. So Nero had the sanctuary, the temple defiled, and they were pushing to open a temple to Caesar in Jerusalem, which itself is an act of blasphemy against God, slandering his name and his habitation, in other words, the temple, and the saints, even those who dwell in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to overcome them. Authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation was given to him. So it seemed that that Nero was the king over the whole earth. All who dwell on earth will express adoration. In other words, will venerate him. Everyone whose name has not, from the foundation of the world, been written in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. Now, this is a very interesting statement because this it's not double predestination, but it's certainly a statement about predestination. That there are those who have been written in the book of life of the Lamb from the foundation of the world. Let anyone who has an ear listen. If anyone is to go into captivity, he will go into captivity. If anyone is to be killed with the sword, he must be killed with the sword. Here is a call for the patient endurance and faith of the saints. So this is the emergence of the Antichrist, who fulfills all of these historical types. Now the whole thing about the 70 shepherds of Israel, which is mentioned in the scriptures in several places, comes from the book of Enoch. Which I have misplaced. One second. Well, let me. So I'm going to have to change this. Okay. Hmm. Okay, so let's look here. This is Enoch chapter 89. And he called 70 shepherds and gave those sheep to them that they might pasture them. And he spoke to the shepherds and their companions, let each individual of you pasture the sheep from now on, and everything that I shall command you that you must do. And I will deliver them over to you, duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them you will destroy. And he gave over to them those sheep. Now, what this is an image of the 70 shepherds are an image of uh, uh, the 70 sons of God, and to each one is being given a nation. In other words, a whole herd of sheep. And he called another and spoke to him, observe and mark everything that the shepherds will do to those sheep, for they will destroy more of them than I have commanded. And every excess in the destruction which will be done through the shepherds, record how many they destroy according to my command, and how many according to their own caprice. Record against every individual shepherd all the destruction he effects. And read out before me by number how many they destroy, how many they deliver over for destruction, that I may have this as a testimony against them, and know every deed of the shepherds, that I may comprehend and see what they do, whether or not they abide by my command which I have commanded them. But they shall not know it, and you shall not declare it to them, nor admonish them, but only record against each individual all the destruction which the shepherds effect each in his time, and lay it all before me. And I saw until those shepherds pastured in their season, they began to slay and to destroy more than they were bidden, and they delivered those sheep into the hands of the lions. The lions and the tigers ate and devoured the greater part of those sheep, and the wild boars ate along with them, and they burned the tower and demolished that house. Now the tower was a kind of a prophetic shorthand for the temple, and demolished that house, which is the house of Israel. So let's go on. This then picks up again. Whoops. On 90, 22 through 25. Okay, let's look here. And I saw until a throne was erected in the pleasant land, and the Lord of the sheep sat himself on it. And the other took the sealed books and opened those books before the Lord of the sheep. And the Lord called those men the 7 first white ones, and commanded that they should bring before him, beginning with the first star, which led the way, all those stars whose private members were like those of horses, and they brought them all before him. And he said to the man who wrote before him, being one of those 70 white ones, and said to him, take those sheep, those 70 shepherds, to whom I delivered the sheep, and who taking them on their own authority slew more than I commanded them. And behold, they were all bound. I saw, and they all stood before him. And the judgment was held first over the stars, and they were judged and found guilty and went to the place of condemnation. And they were cast into an abyss full of fire and flaming and full of pillars of fire. And those 70 shepherds were judged and found guilty, and they were cast into the fiery abyss. Let's go back here. Kindle. All right. So we'll get to the cast into the fire abyss part soon enough. So there's what we can say about this is there are many levels of interpretation. You know, obviously, it had a particular meaning for those for whom it was written. Who were the Jewish Christians, probably in Jerusalem, and or in Palestine at least, who would have been familiar and who would have been completely focused on the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew tradition. And so they would have known the book of Enoch, and would have made the association of the beast who with one of the shepherds of Israel, from this story in the book of Enoch. On the other hand, there's a whole nother level of interpretation, which would have been for the Greek-speaking people who first received this text, though this text was probably first written in Aramaic, so it would have been distributed first among the Hebrew Christians. Then later, the Greeks got a hold of it and translated it into Greek. And so their association would have been with Nero, for example, as one of the great butchers of the Christian people. But there were also other emperors who would have fit very well into this model, or into this typological model. Um, uh, Going back centuries, um, uh, uh, but the text, as we will see, actually identifies the beast from the sea as Nero. So, are there any questions or comments?
So does that?
So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, so I was wondering. So is it all to be interpreted in the past for Dika, or is there some sort of eschatological aspect to it as well?
Well, obviously, all of this is typology,
Okay.
Or allegory. But there's a definite typological relationship, an eschatological typological relationship, to the Antichrist who is to come, to of Christ who is revealed not in a typological way, but as an actual active participant in this, and we'll see that in the next chapter. But all of this language, the dragon, the beast, and so forth, that's all that's allegorical language or typological language, but it's rooted in the prophecies of Daniel, which were written about 300 years before the book of Revelation was written. So there's a past meaning, there was a contemporary meaning, or there was a contemporary meaning in the first century, which not only explained things that went on in the past, and there was if you can say, a past eschatological meaning of what went on before time began, and that was the last chapter. The woman giving birth to a son who was fought by the devil and the devil who fell from heaven, sweeping away with his tail the stars, which represented the fall of the other demons with him. And that was all in, you could call it mythological time, I suppose. It was actually before time. And so there was the historical meaning of when it was written and how it would have been understood by the people to whom it was who received it when it was first written, and their expectations for the imminent coming of Christ. And then there's a current meaning for us now, especially in relation to an eschatological understanding of what happens at the time of the end.
So it's not just singular then, it's kind of polymodal in terms of something that they were able to relate to with Nero, but also now something we can relate to, or in the future relate to something similar happening, or
right
to this degree.
Right, exactly.
One of the comments I'd like to make on this is that this up in verse 7, it's granted to him to make war with the saints. And authority was given over him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. I've always seen that as the ability to not only understand but to speak many languages.
Uh-huh.
And then further down, even in the time of Nero, I mean, making fire come down from heaven. I understand, there were some tricks and ability for sorcerers to do certain things, in Nero's time. But was there anything that's been written about, I mean, literally bringing fire down from heaven that we've seen in this past time?
I don't know. I don't think so that I know of. I'm sure there may be something that's written, but I have no idea what it might be.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. Let's see. So this before we move on, this is a little it's not exactly a quotation, it's an allusion, verse 10 here, to the prophecy of Jeremiah. If anyone is to go into captivity, he will go into captivity. If anyone is to be killed with the sword, he must be killed with the sword. So here in Jeremiah, the Lord says, as many as are for death to death, as many as are for famine to famine, as many as are for the sword to the sword, and as many as are for captivity to captivity. So this is, shall we say, not a particularly encouraging passage. Okay. So the second beast. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. Of course, here again, you've got this antithetical contrast between Christ, who is the Lamb, and who spoke the words of, and who speaks the words of God, as opposed to this beast who had two horns like a lamb. In other words, he's an imposter and spoke like the dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his behalf and makes the earth and those dwell in it express worship before the first beast, the one whose fatal wound had been healed. So you've got here, you've got the contrast between the second beast and the Christ. He performs great signs, even making fire come down from out of the sky to the earth in the sight of people. I think maybe making fire come down out of the sky might refer to a manipulation of lightning, but I'd have no idea how they would do that back 2,000 years ago. He deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs he was granted to perform in front of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. It was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that it would speak and cause as many as would not express adoration to the image of the beast to be killed. So so this is uh, so this is interesting. Um, because what was the task of Nero's henchmen? But was to make an image of the beast, Nero, um, who was and who was wounded by the sword and supposedly lived. Um, but if any would not uh, would not venerate the image, they would be killed. He causes all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given marks on their right hands or on their foreheads. Hence, no one would be able to buy or sell unless he had that mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Now, one of the commentators um, discusses the nature of the mark. And on one hand, historically in the text, the word used for mark in Hebrew or Aramaic, because this was originally Hebrew Aramaic, is the word for snake bite. Um, so unless you, but it's all, but it was, but that was also a colloquial expression for usury, having to pay interest. Of course, in the Christian community, interest, charging interest was a grave sin, as it is also now in Islam. The Christians kind of gave in. But what culture are we talking about, you know? This is, you know, this is from the people, this is the same people who gave us the Federal Reserve, you know? So it's interesting that to think about this in terms of having interest or having to pay interest, being a debtor, essentially, or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now there's a medieval Athonite elder, Niels the Mergusher, who had, I think, a brilliant interpretation of this. And he said that the mark was resentment, hatred or resentment. Anyway, so it says here.
Could I comment on that?
Sure.
In line with that, mark being a mark of resentment, been having some conversations lately about John, verse 666, which is, you know, after the long discussion about the body and the blood, and preceding that, John 6:53 about you know, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you have no life in you. And after that entire conversation, it ends with John 6:66, which, you know, isn't actually put in scripture for almost 1,000 years after it's written. They put verses and chapters in. John 66 is essentially the definition of death. It is that they turned their backs and walked with him no more. And it's not only a mark of resentment, but a deep mark of rejection, that that this was God speaking to them and telling them what the source of life was, and rejecting it. And further, that's the same group of people that just got fed, 5,000 people men anyway that were fed fish and loaves in John chapter 6. So seems to go along with that theme. That's why I bring that up.
Yeah.
It goes along with that deep resentment and rejection, and and it just becomes part of the character.
Let's see. So, okay, so back to verse 18. Here is wisdom. Let anyone who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, 666, both in Hebrew and in Greek, which use letters for they didn't use Arabic numbers. They used letters of the alphabet, and those letters sum up in both languages to 666. If the word is Nero Caesar or Neron Caesar, so for centuries, the interpretation is that this beast it was Nero, and so that what this is, it's a kind of an allegorical explanation of the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, that's the first beast that was Nero. The question is, who is the second beast? Now, the second beast is usually referred to as the false prophet. And he's thought of usually in terms of a kind of a major religious figure. The first beast is this kind of all-powerful king, with this what do you call it? This autocrat. But the second beast would be like the head of his church, because his primary task, at least according to this text, is to set up the image of the beast from the sea and to get people to worship it, and then those who don't to put to death. And to have them have the marks put on them. So I think we looked at this earlier in the book of Revelation. I think, what was it? Chapters. Okay. Remember back in chapter 7, I saw another angel ascend from the rising sun with the seal of the living God in his hand. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was given to harm the earth and say, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants, slaves, doulos, of our God on their foreheads. I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000, sealed out of every tribe of the children of Israel. Then it numbers the tribes. so the 144,000 here make a reappearance at the beginning of the next chapter. Then I looked, and behold, and I saw the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, who have his name and the name of his Father on their foreheads. I also heard a sound from heaven like the roar of many waters, the sound of great thunder. And they sing a new song. Sound I heard was like that of harpists playing on their harps, and they sing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and presbyters. No one could learn the song except the 144,000, those who had been redeemed out of the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who followed the Lamb wherever he goes, and they were redeemed from among mankind as firstfruits to God and to the Lamb. And their mouth was found no lie, for they are blameless. Now, this could be, and I think historically was, interpreted that this 144,000 are not just the redeemed from the tribe of Israel, they're the monks who have maintained their virginity. Um, these are the ones who followed the Lamb wherever he goes. They were redeemed from among mankind. As firstfruits to God and to the Lamb. In their mouth was found no lie, for they are blameless. Then I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, having an eternal good news to proclaim to the inhabitants of the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear the Lord, and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come." Express adoration. This really should be worship. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. A second angel followed and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which has made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her sexual immorality." So this refers to something that is yet to be yet to be discussed in a couple of chapters. Another angel, a third one, followed them, saying with a great voice, "Anyone who worships the beast and his image and receives a mark on his forehead or hand will also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is prepared unmixed in the cup of his anger. They will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb. The smoke of their torment goes up unto the ages of ages. Those who worship the beast and his image, and all those who receive the mark of his name, have no rest day or night. Here is a call for the patient endurance of the saints, those who keep the commands of God and the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven. So here's the torment that we talked about in the Enoch passage of the 70 shepherds. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Right, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, for they shall rest from their labors, and their work shall follow after them." And I looked, and behold, I saw a white cloud, And on the cloud, someone like a son of man was sitting. He had on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. Then another angel came out of the sanctuary with a loud voice. He cried to the one sitting on the cloud, "Launch your sickle and reap, for the hour for you to reap has come. For the harvest of the earth is ripe. He who sat on the cloud swung his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped." And another angel came out from the sanctuary which is in heaven. He too had a sharp sickle. And another angel who had power over fire came out from the altar. He called with loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, saying, "Swing your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for the earth's grapes are fully ripe." So the angel swung his sickle on the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. The winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood came out from the winepress as high as the bridles of horses and as far as 1,600 stadia. So 184 miles. So a stadia, whatever it is about 5 miles. So this is the preparation, heavenly preparation, for the eschaton. The gathering of the troops, the 144,000. Then the angel proclaiming the gospel to every tribe, nation, language, and people, warning them of judgment, and telling them to worship him who made heaven and earth. And then the second angel proclaiming the fall of Babylon. So Babylon in this case is not simply the Babylon, the city in Mesopotamia, because the temple in Jerusalem was referred to as Babylon. And so that we'll see that in a couple of chapters. It's also very interesting, especially with the association of the Second Temple being the whore of Babylon, that has made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her sexual immorality. Referring to the corruption of the priesthood, primarily. So anyway, so any comments on this? We can pick back up with this next week.
Isn't this
No
the
comment.
passage, though, that most of people in our culture are just kind of like, well, you mentioned earlier that they would use this passage as kind of proof for double predestination. And it seems like modern people seem to want to interpret this heavily for themselves as proof of imminent doom.
Mm-hmm.
But how are we to take that? How are we to answer that when they do that? When I don't think it's any clearer now than it ever was.
No, it's not. Well, I think what the message is not, watch out or you're going to go to hell. The message is remain faithful and don't give in to the temptation. What is it? It's giving into the temptations of the world. And that's ultimately the spiritual Babylon that is worship the beast, who is and is bound for destruction. That's the world. Those who've received the mark on their foreheads or on their hands, and especially, I think, it's very it's a very powerful interpretation of St. Nilus that the mark of the beast is resentment and hatred. Because what identifies us with Satan more than hatred and resentment, and what banishes God from us more than hatred and resentment. And so
so you're saying it's not a barcode that we're going to get printed on our hand?
No, I don't think, or a chip.
Okay, good.
I don't think it's Neuralink. I'm not interested in getting a Neuralink, quite frankly, at all. I'll take my brain as it is, for better or worse. But I think it's it's a warning to be very careful lest we fall into that worship of the beast or his image. No, what I was going to talk about that. One of the commentators, Margaret Barker, thinks that the second beast was Josephus. Because Josephus was a traitor to his people. He went over to the Roman side and served as a go-between to the leaders of the revolt in Jerusalem as it was under siege, and he tried to persuade them to capitulate to the Romans. He also tried to persuade them to erect a statue to the emperor. And in the end, he survived the whole debacle in Jerusalem, where tens of thousands of people were butchered by the Romans, and the city was leveled to its foundations. He was awarded a permanent a villa and a permanent stipend, all tax-free, from by the Roman emperor. And he was not exactly somebody who was revered by the Jews, to say the least. Either the Christian Jews or the Jews, because he was a traitor to his people. So that's an interesting, that's a very interesting identification. He also engaged. He was a priest, from a very wealthy high priestly family, and And if you look back down at this, he performed signs and wonders. He was also a magician. And so it's a pretty much of a description of what he did. He deceives those who dwell on earth because of the signs he was granted to perform in front of the emperor, saying that to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image. It was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast. In other words, he made it speak, which evidently was a kind of typical thing for Babylonian magicians to do. And he oversaw the deaths of those who refused to venerate the image of the emperor. So it's a pretty good fit. And he became the main historian whose works that we still have regarding the history of the Jews, especially in that up to his era. So, which he wrote as an agent of the Romans. So is there anybody have anything? I'd like to welcome Sam.
Yeah, thank you.
Have you been to the site of Old Babylon?
You're talking about the Revelation?
Yeah. Have you been to, in Iraq, have you been to the site of Old Babylon?
A little bit, yeah.
It's just piles of rocks, basically, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a lot of there's so many historical places, but it's very very undiscovered and neglected. Yeah. I do have a question, and just to follow up on Josephus. So even though if he is a traitor to the Jewish, but like why would John describe him as a beast? I mean, he was actually he was technically fair to the way the Christian movement, the early Christians, because he said if this is from God, then just leave them alone. So I mean, he wouldn't. Maybe a Jewish person would describe him as a beast. And the other thing is in the book of Enoch is I know that some consider canonical and some not considered canonical books. So I mean, do we just need to read the book as a just like to take some information, but not to take it the whole thing?
Right. It's not a canonical book, at least for our churches. It is for the Ethiopians. It's in their canon of scripture. But the book of Enoch really has the underlying mythology of that is referenced both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So, and there are parts of the book of Enoch that are very ancient. What the current version is and how authentic it is as representing, I'm not sure. However, in Qumran, there were 20 copies of the book of Enoch. The only other book that had as many copies was this prophet Isaiah in that library.
So why wouldn't what was part of the like canon? Why was it and how was, I mean, I know that this is not the time to ask like why, how do they canonize a book or not, but if it's that, you know, like with that importance, didn't make it.
I don't know. It's probably because the authorship was dubious. And also it's pretty weird, you know.
Yeah.
And so it basically represents the underlying mythology. It also is, there are two basic schools in Judaism. There was the rabbinic Talmudic Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, which came out of the exile. And then there were the Hebrews that were left, who maintained the tradition of the first temple. Those Hebrews later are now called Palestinians. And they, and because the second temple was the product of a radical reformation within Hebrew religion, the people who held to the faith of the first temple basically rejected it. Enoch represents the teaching of the first temple to a great extent, or would come out of the teaching of the first temple. But it's, you know, it's not a uniform theological treatise. There are probably parts of it that go back 2,500 years, well, 2,500 years BC, or at least at least 1,000 years BC, 3,000 years before now. And then other aspects of it were from different parts of Hebrew history. So, and then some of it may have had a little Christian editing as well. So I don't know the textual history per se. It'd be interesting to research. So, but yeah, it's worth reading. I mean, it's very interesting. It helps you understand certain references both in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. But it represents a very different narrative than Judaism, or rabbinic Judaism. So, will that do it for tonight?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So let's pray. It is truly meet to bless thee, Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless, the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption, thou gavest birth to God the Word. The very Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you, through his grace and love for mankind, always, now, and ever, and to ages of ages. Amen.